Catherine, are you going to keep the participants muted during the presentation? Catherine, you're muted.
Yes, the participants will be muted and we can take questions towards the end.
Okay.
So everyone, we're ready when you are.
We're ready. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. We're very happy to have you here with us in this first virtual Theology and Tap in the Archdiocese of San Antonio. We've been planning this evening with Bob McCarty for a long time. And it was months ago that I met him in Dallas during a conference and we started planning for this. And we were supposed to meet before COVID here in San Antonio for one of our live meetings of Theology and Tap. That didn't happen, of course. Nevertheless, we're here and we're very happy to have him with us. I will be posting the bio in a minute in our chat so you can learn more about it, our tonight's speaker. And as you probably read when you were entering the meeting, you're all on mute right now and we will keep it that way so we will be able to follow the presentation without any background noise. Nevertheless, you're invited to post your questions in the chat. You can do that either directly to everybody or you can send them to Catherine or myself. My name is Aaron Castillo. I am the Secretariat Director for Mission here at the Archdiocese of San Antonio. And we will be happy to read them out loud. Or you can raise your virtual hand when the time comes at the end of the presentation so you can ask your question live. We can do any of those options. And with that being said, I'm very happy to welcome again Bob McCarty, who's going to be presenting on crafting a religious identity, the challenge and the blessings. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we need to do any kind of an intro before Aaron, before we start with prayer and then start our presentation?
We're ready to go.
Yes. Well, my friends, I just want to tell you how happy I am to be with you, even if it's virtually. I'm sitting right outside of Washington, D.C. I live in Laurel, Maryland. I've been in ministry with the church for actually over 45 years. My whole career has been dedicated to youth and young adult ministry and to leadership development in the church. And so I'm very excited about being with you tonight and talking about this issue of crafting a religious identity. But how about this? How about before we actually start the presentation, how about if we just pause a moment, remind ourselves that we're always in the presence of a loving God. And so let's just pause and I'll invite you to do this. It's obvious when you read the paper, you listen to the news that our country is in turmoil. And so let's remember the victims of racism. Let's remember the victims of COVID-19. Let's remember all those families affected by the financial fallout and the financial crisis. Let's hold them in our hearts and we pray that Creator God, we ask your blessing upon all those who are suffering, all those who are oppressed, all those who are dealing with difficult circumstances in their life. Grant them grace, grant them perseverance, grant them courage, bless them with caring friends, caring family. Moisten our hearts that we are better able to respond to those in need. And all this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. And now, Catherine, it's my turn. How do I get, oh, there we go. So my friends, here's what we're going to do. First off, I want to tell you, I am really excited about this topic. You're the first group that's going to hear most of what I want to say about this. I told you I've been a youth and young adult ministry for a long time, but for the last 3 years, I've been coordinating a research project for St. Mary's Press called Going, Going, Gone, the Dynamics of Disaffiliation in Young Catholics. We've been studying why do young Catholics walk away from the church? And so tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're learning in our research, why people walk away from church. But there's another part to this that I wasn't expecting. People are walking away from church, but they're not walking away from God. That what I am finding is that young adults today are literally crafting a religious identity in very new and innovative ways. It doesn't look like church, but it's no less authentic. And this is fascinating to me. So tonight, what I'd like to be able to do, when I think about crafting a religious identity, the challenge part is I want to share with you what I've learned about people who walk away from church. And then I want to share with you, and here's how I think people are constructing a religious identity today. And I'll be really anxious at the end to hear some of your comments and questions to see how this fits with your lived experience. And so to begin, I'm going to ask you to call to mind, to make this real so that this isn't an academic exercise. I'm going to ask you to, if you would, call to mind a young person that you know. Could be a friend, could be a family member, might be yourself. Call to mind somebody that you know by name who's walked away from the church. And I'm going to ask you to hold that person in your mind. Recall their name. Think about what might be impacting their decision-making around church. And here's my guess. My guess is that the people you're thinking about are really good people. I'll bet they're quality people. And here's my belief. I believe that we are the church. We, the people, are the church. It's not the building, it's us. So that says to me, if we stay in relationship with those who walked away from the church, they are still in relationship with the church. If we stay in relationship with them, they are in relationship with the church. And that's why this topic is so very, very important. We need to be steadfast in staying in relationship with all those who maybe walked away from the church. Because I maintain that the spirit is operating within them, and our role is to be a support to them. And I want to be able to unpack that a bit. I want to start this way. When we talk about young adults in the church, there's no such thing as here's the epitome of young adult. Here's the stereotypic young adult. It doesn't exist. What we've learned in the research is that young adults today in the church, about 20% of them, we call them the abiders, they have a high degree of commitment to the church, a commitment to their own religiosity, and to the practice of the faith. So we would call them on the high end of the spectrum. And this is important because if you're in a leadership role in a parish, you need to know that our arena is pretty broad. So you have the abiders, and here's the difficulty. For people who work for the church, the abiders are the ones that we see. We often don't see the other 80%, and we wind up ministering to the ones we see, which Pope Francis reminds us we are called to be a field hospital for the marginalized. So you have these 20% who are the abiders, you have 20% who are the adapters. They're the ones who come to Mass maybe every once in a while. You have the assenters who are kind of like the spiritual but not religious. The avoiders want nothing to do with it. And then only a small percent are genuine atheists. But this is the arena. This is the arena in which we're called to work now. This is where we're called to minister. This is the group to whom parishes are called to respond. This whole group. Okay, so now with that, I want to make this real for you. One of the best parts of my work in this project has been interviewing young adults across the country. So I'm going to invite you to listen. This is a 3-minute video of Beatrice. And I want to give you a heads up. As you're watching the video, as you're listening to Beatrice's story, I want you to see if you can identify at what age does she decide to walk away from church and what led to that. So I want you to hear her story. Listen to the story of Beatrice.
I was born in San Carlos, Sonora, but I grew up in Ciudad Obregón. We were brought up Catholic. We moved here, and that's when we started going to the Christian church when we came to the United States. My uncle became a pastor here, so my family went from being Catholic, and they've slowly been converting to moving to the Christian church. My grandma was very religious. My mom didn't really go to church all that much until we came here. Whenever we would go to church, I would have to confess to the Father, to this person that I didn't really know. I had to tell him all the bad things that I did as a 10-year-old, which to me was insane. What kind of sins can a 10-year-old be committing? Like lying, little things, and that would make me feel little. I would say about 2 years ago or so, my way of thinking just kind of shifted, and I just started believing on my own. I believe in a higher power, definitely, but I don't believe in organized religion altogether, because I believe it segregates people instead of bringing them together, which is supposed to be. There's a lot of good points in the Bible that you can refer to, but I believe that the real meaning of the Bible, if it's the truth, it's been lost in translation. It's just misinterpreted in so many ways. I believe that gay marriage, like, how is that affecting anyone else but the people that are involved in the relationship? Like, it shouldn't matter what other people are doing. If it's a sin, then we all sin differently. And when they start implementing like certain beliefs and they want you to live your life in a certain way, and then you start making decisions that are not making you happy just because you want to fit in that little box. And I realized that that wasn't really what I wanted to do with my life. I believe that there's different paths. Like if you're going up a mountain, like there's different paths to the top of the mountain, but it doesn't mean that my path is the right one. It's all leading you to the same place. It's all about bettering yourself and giving back and just being a better person in general. I think that's great. That's what people should do. The higher power lives within you and within me, like, because we're all one. Nature is part of us, and I feel like when people embrace that, they can see really that they don't really need religion. I go hiking a lot. I like to golf a lot. Anything that takes place outdoors, I really enjoy. You reach this state of zen that you're not gonna reach at church. When you leave church, you just like leave feeling judged. You learn to appreciate your solitude, and I feel like that's really great. You become more connected with yourself. I feel like a lot of people now have a big problem being alone, and if you don't learn to be alone, you're always going to be lonely. I'm more happy with myself now.
So did you hear her? Did you hear at what age did she stop? At what age did she start pulling away from church? Did you hear that? 10. And did you hear how church made her feel? She said it made her feel small and judged, and she had to find her own path. Beatrice fits into this category called the nones. It's the fastest growing group in the United States. And what's important for us for today, look at the last bullet point. It is estimated that there's about 20 million former Catholics. That means former Catholics is the second largest denomination in the United States. It's incredible. Roman Catholics are the largest. There's about 70 million of us. And then there's former Catholics, and then there's Southern Baptists. There's there's only about 14 million Southern Baptists. They were about 17 million. So they're losing their population as well. 20 million former Catholics, 5.4 million of them are youth and young adults. That's our arena. That's the arena in which we're called to operate as ministers in the church. But look at this for a moment. Just look at the top bar graph. This is really important. Look at this dark blue section here. It's estimated that there's 35% of those who walk away are between 18 and 29. So there's our young adult group right there. But 37% of those who walk away are between 30 and 49, and another 19% are between 50 and 64. What this says is that we don't have a youth problem. We don't have a young adult problem. We have a faith community challenge. People at all different ages are walking away from church. I think it's really important for us in pastoral ministry today to understand that this is not about youth and young adults. I think they're the clearest example of what's happening, but we need to understand that people of all ages are walking away from church. So we have a church challenge here, not just a youth and young adult challenge here. So in our research, we started to ask these young adults, at what age did you stop identifying as Catholic? Now, let me just say this. It's really important to get the language correct so that you quote it correctly. We asked them at what age did they stop identifying? Not necessarily what age did they stop going to church. When did they stop identifying as Catholic? So in your head, you could be the armchair sociologist for a minute. See if you have an age in your head about what was the median age for these young people who walked away. See if you get that, put it in your head for a moment. All right, you ready? Look at this. The median age is 13. 13. Wow. Look at this. If you go from 10 years old here all the way around to 20 years old, 74% of those who walk away from the Catholic Church make that decision between 10 and 20 years old. That's why our youth and young adult ministry today is so vitally important, because that's exactly you heard Beatrice. She was 10 or 11 when she started to check out of church. I think that's really important. And you know what this means for us? Because 13 is the median age, this means we have young people sitting in our pews every Sunday who've already checked out. We have young people in our youth ministry programs, in our confirmation programs, in our religious ed. We have young people in our Catholic schools who've already checked out, that they're just biding their time until they're old enough to make the decision on their own, which is why this ministry is so vitally important for us. 13 as the median age. Okay, so now when we ask them, why did you leave? Here's the challenge. There's no single reason. If there were, then we could tailor our response to that issue, but there's no single reason. Some of them walk away because they're bored. Some walk away because they don't find the worship vibrant. They don't find the sacraments meaningful. Some don't feel welcomed. Some disagree with certain church teachings. There's a variety of reasons, which means no single reason, no single solution. That's why I call this a faith community challenge. How are we as a church going to engage our youth and our young adults at every stage of their life so that they feel like they're vibrant members of a faith community that cares about them? And so with that, I would propose this. I think that there are these 5 fundamental hungers. And I think this is at the root of people walking away, because I think people go where their hungers are fed. I think they have a hunger for meaning and purpose. I think everyone is trying to make sense out of life, really. I think they want a reason to live. I think they want a goal. They want to know what the future holds for them. For young people, for younger folks, younger children, things like, what will I be when I grow up? Does God have a plan for me? Where will my life take me? They want a reason. Why am I here? What is this about? They have a hunger for connection. They want to belong somewhere, to be connected to others. Sometimes this connection is as basic as one-on-one, the search for intimacy. And sometimes it's larger than that. I need to belong to a community. I'm going to come back to this. This hunger for belonging, for connection, is a critical factor in our church response to the disaffiliated. They have a hunger for recognition. I think especially middle school and high school, but I think it carries over to young adult years and even adult years. We have a hunger to be recognized as having gifts to share. We have something that we can bring to the table. We have value and worth. Don't underestimate this. It's as simple as calling people by name, calling them by name as a way of recognizing them that you are here and I see you. I think there's a hunger for the holy. And sometimes people think this might be the least obvious, but I believe that I think we are created in the image and likeness of God. It's in Genesis chapter 1, I think it's verse 24. We're made in the image and likeness of God. And what that means, I think, is imprinted on our soul is this hunger to be connected with our Creator. St. Augustine, the great saint, his prayer was something like, Lord, my soul is restless until it rests in thee. I think that's true of all of us. On some level, we are hungry to be connected to the Creator, to mystery, to the transcendent. What's going to be interesting, and I'll come back to this in a moment, how are people meeting that hunger today? What does that look like? And then the hunger for justice. I think this is one of the most admirable traits in our youth and young adults today, is their hunger for justice. It is young people around the world who are leading the global and climate change movements. That's young people. Have you seen the number of young people who are leading the protest march against racism and white supremacy? I mean, young people are taken to the streets again. I think there's a hunger for justice. I think there's a hunger for service. And so the question is going to be, where are young people going today to meet these hungers? That's the pastoral question. Where are young people going to have their hungers fed? And so what that's going to look like for us then, as we start to think about this, it happens in the middle of something bigger. And this something bigger is the secular world in which we live. And this is where it's a challenge. And I am not going to blame the world. I'm not, because we created it. I mean, secularization exists is because humans created it. But look at these characteristics. We live in a global world. There's no denying that. You have a virus in China that now has infected 4 million people just in the United States. And I think it's 10 million around the world. We live in a global society where an action somewhere in another country affects all of us. We live in a pluralistic society. You know this from your own diocese, from San Antonio. The United States is one of the most multicultural, culturally diverse countries in the world. We live in a pluralistic society, not ethnically, culturally, spiritually, religiously. It's different. We live in an era of cognitive rationalization where we try to figure everything out with our mind, and I think sometimes to the exclusion of what's in our hearts, what's in our spirit. We are anti-institution. This is going to be an issue. I'm going to come back to this in terms of church. We tend to be distrustful of institutions, and we are seeing the fallout from that right now in terms of the lack of a national response to the COVID-19 virus. We don't have the institutions in place to deal with this on a national level. So it's been left to the state of Texas, for me, the state of Maryland, the city of San Antonio, for me, right outside of Washington, D.C. We're trying to handle all this locally, which I think is a national issue. We don't understand tradition. I think this is a real tough one for young people. I don't think they have a good sense. As Catholic, we think tradition is so important. We capitalize the T. We think tradition is incredibly valuable because we want to know humanity's experience of God, of Jesus over the last 2,000 years. But I think that's a tough sell today. And finally, and this is the hardest one, I think, the emphasis on individual autonomy as opposed to the communal good. Just as a PS, if any of you are familiar with Catholic social teaching, you know that the Catholic Church has an emphasis on the common good, on the communal good. We take that, that's the first principle of Catholic social teaching. We think that's critically important, that we have a responsibility for each other. We're living in a country that seems to be emphasizing individual personal autonomy. And I'm not trying to be political here, but you know what the clearest example of that is? Do you wear a mask or don't you? And I'm not trying to be political, but I am saying it's the clearest example of this factor in our culture right now that I find to be a challenge for all of us. And so with that, look at this. They've done this study of, go back to that lack of trust in institutions from the 1970s to today. And look at this. Every national institution, people have lost trust in those institutions. Now, this study came out before the COVID-19 virus. Can you imagine what would the medical system look like today? What would the presidency look like today? What would Congress look like today? Where's our trust? And look what's happened to organized religion. The decline in trust. So now think about this. For those of you who work for the church, either as full-time professional staff or as volunteer ministry in your parishes and in your schools or in your community, we are the institution. We are. And you wonder sometimes why it's so difficult to reach out to our youth and young adults and even our adults who've lost trust in the institution. This is phenomenal. And I have a fear around schools. And as we continue to go on and on with schools not opening, I think people are going to struggle. I think, but you get a sense of how all this fits in here. And so how does that play out then in terms of religious identity? What does that start to look like for us? I believe that instead of identity being passed down, for many of you on this call, you inherited part of your religious identity from your parents. Well, I don't think that's happening today. That what's happening today, more often than not, you will hear parents say, I want you to get confirmed, and after that, you can decide if you want to go to church or not. You get to make a choice, personal autonomy. So this religious identity is personally constructed. Oftentimes it's piecemeal. People are taking pieces of various traditions. And I want to come back to that because I read an interesting article in the Washington Post this past Lent that Protestant denominations were starting to pick up Catholic practices, Stations of the Cross, even using the rosary, ashes. They were using Catholic symbols because they were just trying to draw from other denominations here to find something that had meaning. So now watch what happens with youth and young adults. Watch what goes on here. Remember that 20% who are the abiders, highly engaged, they participate in the sacramental life. They follow the teachings of the church. They're involved in the community. They're involved in religious practices. They pray. They probably participate in religious ed of some kind. They even financially support the parish. Okay, but then what happens? What happens all of a sudden when then all of a sudden you read about the clergy sex abuse issue in the church, and all of a sudden that sense of membership gets a little bit stretched. And then what happens, as we had happen up here, we read about some of the financial scandals in the church, and that identity gets a little stretched further. Or what happens if you don't feel welcomed in your parish? What happens when you go to church and no one recognizes or calls you by name? If you don't feel like you belong, then all of a sudden you stretch to the breaking point and you go, I'm out of here. I can't do this anymore. I can't be part of this anymore. And we move out of that affiliation sphere of church to disaffiliation. But the statistics say we start to think about that median age at 13. Think about how important your ministry is, given that statistic. So with that then, I'm going to invite you to listen to Rachel's story. Rachel's dad is a deacon in the church. He's a Catholic high school teacher. Watch how she describes her dad, but listen to Rachel's story. Listen to Rachel's story.
I grew up very Catholic. My family, I call them super Catholics. It's their life. My dad works for the church. I remember my dad praying with us every evening. He was a very good catechist. Through high school, I was like, I have to follow all the rules. I have to be like a perfect person, a good person. My perspective was very black and white, and I knew the right way, and everybody else didn't who wasn't Catholic. But then when I went to college, things started to change. The people who were in my life weren't all Catholic. I remember feeling uncomfortable because I didn't know how to relate to non-Catholics. I remember asking my roommate one time, like, I noticed that I'm only hanging out and being friends with Catholics, and you are comfortable with everyone. And she said, I just have so much love to give, and it's about loving other people. It's not about whether they're Catholic or not. You start to question everything, and questioning hadn't been a huge part of my upbringing in my Catholic faith. Questioning was allowed as long as you came back to the conclusion that was given to you in the first place. But now I was starting to question and realizing that my conclusions weren't always going back to what I had been given from my youth. That was really scary for me, and during that time I really lost my faith. I didn't even know if I believed in God anymore. Now, my identification is more Catholic-ish. It's part of my culture. It's how I was raised, and I'm thankful for a lot of it, especially Catholic social teaching. There's such a wealth of beauty and information in Catholic social teaching about how we can better love one another. A huge part of my spirituality is social justice, and I have maybe more liberal leanings in the things that I find trouble with. Like being ordained. I think women deserve to follow the call that God has placed in their life as much as anyone else. I'm not interested in a church that divides people. That's what Jesus talked about so much, is unifying people. Instead of changing people so that they can come to the church, let people come to the church and then be transformed by their experience.
Did you hear that? Did you hear? She was allowed to have questions as long as she came back to the answer she was given. She calls herself Catholic-ish, but what does she hold on to? She holds on to Catholic social teaching. And in fact, Rachel works for a national Catholic social justice organization based in Washington, D.C. She's remarkable to talk to, but that last line about coming to church, do we have to be perfect before we come to church, or do we come to church to be healed? I think what a powerful image for church. If people have the impression that church is only for the saints, I think we missed the point of the gospel. I do. But Rachel seems to be able to name some of those issues, and she calls herself Catholic-ish. She's still on the journey. She's still trying to figure out where are the hungers being fed. So for the Rachels of our church, how are they meeting these hungers? What's it like for them? This is fascinating to me. Young adults today are creating community in a variety of ways. I just learned about a group called the Dinner Club. You can Google the Dinner Club, and it has to be the Dinner Club. If you Google Dinner Club, you get recipes, because I made that mistake. But the Dinner Club is fascinating. Two young adult women, this is probably 4 years ago, two young adult women, both of whom had experienced significant loss in their life, got together over a meal and wine to share their pain. I think they posted it on Facebook, and the next thing you knew, people wanted to join them. People were in pain and didn't know where to go with their pain. And now there are dinner clubs. I don't know how many hundreds of cities across the United States. I know there's one in Baltimore and there's one here in Washington, D.C. They're in several countries around the world. They've even, if you have time, they have a manual that they have posted online on how you form a dinner club. Now, if you're in church ministry, see if this sounds familiar. They have a chapter on icebreakers, conversation starters, blessings, and recipes. I mean, can you believe it? I mean, that sounds like a youth ministry manual. That's what it sounds like to me. But what it says is that people are forming community in whole new ways. This is so interesting. A young adult said to me, the new church for young adults is the fitness center. And I looked and he said, think about this. Fitness centers. You go to a fitness center and here's his words. They greet you by name. They welcome you in. They help you set goals and they help you achieve those goals and then they celebrate with you. You talk about connection, you talk about recognition. Planet Fitness here in the DC area. Here's their advertisement on TV. Planet Fitness, the no judgment zone. Think about Beatrice, the no judgment zone. Planet Fitness, no commitment necessary. $10 down, $10 a month, something like that. It's like, and then CrossFit, the owner of CrossFit did a video message to all CrossFit employees at the end of last year. And he said to them, I want to remind you that CrossFit is not in the fitness business. We are in the belonging business. If you get to know our clients' names, if you get to know their hopes and their fears, you get to help them achieve their goals, they will never leave us. Think about this. People are crafting a religious identity in totally new ways. And then across the United States, the rise in yoga centers, meditation centers, the rise in the number of they call them secular retreats. Think of it in terms of the hungers. People are hungry. They're hungry for the holy. They're hungry for connection. They're hungry for meaning. And if they don't find it in the church, they're going to find it somewhere else. They're going to go somewhere else to respond to those hungers. So what's going on for you? Now think about it for you personally, okay? Think about the hungers. How are we crafting our religious identity? Where's our hunger for meaning and purpose being fed today? This would be a wonderful reflection activity. If we had more time, just for you to take some time for yourself and think for yourself. Where do you find meaning and purpose today? Who provides that? What provides that? What gives you a sense of life has value to it? That I'm heading in a direction, that there's a work I'm supposed to do. Where's that hunger being fed for you? Where do you go so that you can be assured you're called by name? Where do you go where people recognize your gifts? Is it church? Is it the fitness center? Is it a community center? Is it some other volunteer work? I'm amazed at the number of young adults who belong to sports leagues. I think it's about connection. I think it's about recognition. Where do you go so you can be called by name? Where do you go? How do you answer the question, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? What is home for me? That hunger for connection. Where do I go to experience one-on-one intimacy? Where do I go to fit in and be part of a group? You see, where are these hungers being fed? Where do I go for my hunger for justice? You know, Mother Teresa said, service is the rent we pay for living on the earth. I think that young people, without even using that language, have a sense of that they want to make the world a better place, that hunger for justice. I think it's one of the hallmarks of being Catholic. I do. But I think today, young people are going to a variety of places to meet that hunger. And what about the hunger for the holy? See, I think people have it embedded on their soul. They know there's something more. There's a hunger for transcendence and mystery. I want to connect to this God. Sometimes they use different language. Did you hear Beatrice? She said, I believe in a higher power. That's how she referred to God. And she said, for her, there's many paths that take her there. There's many paths that take you to the top. We're all heading in the same direction. But now here's where our faith comes in. You see, I firmly believe Jesus is the answer to those hungers. I think the Jesus of the Gospels responds to these hungers. I believe it. I don't know if that's the Jesus that our young people have encountered. I don't know if that's the Jesus young people hear about. But the Jesus who provides meaning and purpose. Here's what life is about. Here's what I call you to. Jesus says in the Gospel of John, I tell you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. Are people experiencing that Jesus today? The Jesus who calls people by name. He called all the apostles by name. He calls them by name to come follow me. People are hungry for that kind of recognition. What do you think it was like to be the leper, to be the blind man, to be the deaf man who are healed by Jesus, to be recognized by Jesus? You have value. You have worth. Jesus called them to connection. He calls them to connection with himself, and he calls them to be connected to the community of believers. Do our youth and young adults know that today? Do they experience that sense of connection? The call to justice is a hallmark of being Catholic. We're Catholic. We engage the world. This is fascinating to me. Do you know that 1 out of every 4 hospital beds in the United States is in a Catholic hospital? There's 660 Catholic hospitals in the United States. Do you know that every day in the world, 1 million kids are being educated by the Christian Brothers in a Catholic school around the world? And that's just the Christian Brothers. Do you know every day in the United States, 1 million hungry people eat in Catholic institutions? Every day, that's what we do. We're Catholic. We engage the world. We take on all the big issues. That's who we are. And that hunger for the holy, see, we believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the way to the Father. When you see Jesus, you see the Father. When you encounter Jesus, you encounter the Father. You encounter holiness. That's who we are. We are a church that ought to be responding to these 5 hungers, and Jesus is at the center of those hungers for us. And so listen to it this way. Listen to these young people talk about their hungers.
I want to be known.
In a place where my true self is nurtured.
In a place where I am welcome.
A place where it's free of judgment.
A place where I don't fear rejection.
Where I'm free to express my struggles, my doubts, and my hopes.
A place where I'd be missed if I were gone.
Where you're known by name, where you're missed when you're gone. Those young people who walked away from the church, do we miss them? Do we know their name? Do they know we miss them? Do they know that we are less of a community when they're not with us? Here's what the Pope says. Pope Francis, in his exhortation on young people, Christus Vivit, he says in this outreach, and look what he says about the language of closeness, of generous relational and existential love, the language of love that impacts people's lives, awakens hope, and especially in this time in the world, I think hope is a missing value, a missing virtue here. But then he says, young people need to be approached with the grammar of love. And then he challenges all of us by those who radiate life. That's us. By those who are for them and with them. That's us. The challenge and the blessings as our young people are crafting a religious identity. The challenge of the church and all of our pastoral ministers, can we walk with our young people as they are on that spiritual journey? Can we accompany them as they try to meet their hungers? And can we be the kind of church, can we be the community that feeds those hungers for meaning and purpose and recognition and connection and justice and the holy? We stop here. I'm so interested to hear, what are you thinking? What are you thinking now? What did you hear with our last 10 minutes to go here? What did you hear that stood out for you? What's rattling around for you?
Bob, thank you very much for your presentation. I just want to remind everybody that you can either raise your virtual hand so you can speak out your question, or you can type it in the chat as it was just mentioned by Kath. Thank you.
Part of this is sometimes, here's how I feel sometimes. It's like, did you feel like you're trying to drink from a fire hydrant? I mean, really, it's like, it just kind of comes rushing at you. But was there something that caught your imagination or caught your, in one of the videos, something one of our young people said, but is there something that kind of caught your imagination when you think about this whole crafting a religious identity kind of thing that's going on?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this talk also. I'm from this, my name's Emily. I'm originally from Alexandria, Virginia. So
right across the river.
Yeah. But I took some notes on your talk. I enjoyed it so much. But one thing that really stuck out to me is folks identifying as like spiritual, not religious.
Yeah.
That's a common phrase. It's even in like a popular song. But two things I have to think about that is I always think like spirituality is like the beautiful flowers of our faith. But without the church, you have no roots. Like there's nothing to feed those flowers. So I do worry about so many folks are Catholic because they were raised Catholic, but then as we get generations removed, I don't know if this spirituality, if you're going to be able to feed your children off that without roots. And then I don't have any questions, but it's just crazy. I love you were talking about the hunger, and hunger is like so poignant because the church, we literally have the bread of life. We have what to feed your hunger, but we're, I guess, serving it on like a plate of human sin. So I don't know the solution to that, but I love that you spoke about hunger.
Emily, I concur with what you're saying. I think religion is vitally important because here's my image. Because I know this sounds so trite, but it's actually a pretty deep thought. God is bigger than any one of us. And that's why church is important. I need to hear your experience of God. You need to hear mine. We are part of a Catholic tradition that for 2,000 years has been looking at this relationship with God through Jesus. We have a lot to learn from that, and that can sustain us. But in a culture that emphasizes the individual, the communal can get lost. And I think that's one of the factors that impacts all of it. But here's the other part, like Beatrice. But if your community is not welcoming, if it doesn't engage me, if it doesn't call me by name, if it doesn't miss me, yeah. So that's the challenge in all of this. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Sister Christina, please go ahead.
So I think I want to just make a comment. There's two Christinas. Oh, I'm sorry, sister.
We have 7 Christinas. No, I'm just kidding.
No, go. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I was like, oops, I didn't know there were 2 of us. Sorry. So I think I wanted to just make 2 statements. One was like the way you talked about the fitness world and how it's a place of belonging. And that's people seeking God. I remember years ago when the documentary for minimalism came out on Netflix, what I saw in those people was also them seeking God, because they were talking about how they quit their high paying jobs, and then we're looking more for experiences and spending time with people and traveling. And so I like the way you outlined all those different hungers, because it falls under there. And then also about like knowing the true scriptural Jesus. I know when I began my formation as a sister, when I started reading the Gospels daily, I was just like, this isn't like how we think of Jesus out. If you're not studying, if you're not reading it every day, like Jesus is just like, oh, he's just some nice hippie guy. But you don't see how radical he is and how much he actually draws and calls people out. And so that really connects us to the social justice thing, which I just think not enough people know or realize. They think our faith is more about just being quiet and praying. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's like there's a disconnect.
Yeah, you know what? I teach confirmation in my parish, and they're high school kids. I've been a volunteer for over 30 years in my parish. And so I had these high school kids for 7 weeks for immediate prep for confirmation. And my kids are pretty slow. They don't learn a whole lot. But there's one thing they learn. They learn this. They do. Here's what that means. All my high school kids can tell you this. My relationship with God has to impact my relationship with my neighbor. And the very first time I did that, the kid said, Mr. Bob, you're making the sign of the cross. I said, that's exactly right. I said, whenever we make the sign of the cross, we're doing 3 things. We're remembering the crucifixion. We remember the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy. And I made this one up. My relationship with God impacts my relationship with my neighbor. Sister, it's that combination. The Jesuits call it, we are a person of contemplation and action. We're called to be both. It's exactly that. And that's when we're at our best. I think that's when we're at our best. When we can combine both, we're at our best as Catholics. We're at our best. Christina Martinez, what are you thinking?
I just wanted to comment on, what was it, the last story that we saw, the Rachel girl, the one about the college?
Yeah.
And I never thought about it until I heard her say it. So I'm in San Antonio. My parish is St. Mark the Evangelist. I'm a catechist with Edge, and I do First Communion preparation. And I help with our college group for night prayer. We do the Liturgy of the Hour prayers. And my parish I go to for daily mass is St. Matthew's. But I never thought about like how it was when I was in college, because I went to school in Massachusetts. So I went to a Catholic women's university. But it just dawned on me, I don't think any of my college friends were actually Catholic. I think maybe 2 of them were. And then even when I came back home and I went to the University of Incarnate Word here in town, which is another Catholic university, same thing. I think I made 2 Catholic friends per se, and they were all very different. But what I liked about what Rachel had said was that, it wasn't about like putting ourselves to just our Catholic people when we were in college and school and stuff. It was just about, living, to me, it was like living my life in my faith and how I am. So it didn't really matter that, okay, yeah, I went to a Catholic school, I went to a women's college in Boston, but none of my classmates, nobody was Catholic. And I never thought about that before until I heard her say that.
And it's interesting because Rachel went to a Catholic school. I think she went to John Carroll University in Cleveland, Catholic school. And she works for a Catholic organization, but you only see a 3-minute segment, I still see Rachel. We have lunch together probably once a month because I'm right outside of Washington. She is still on the journey. You know, she's a bright woman, very insightful. She is still on the journey of faith, asking good questions. It's a delight. It's a delight to share, to accompany her on her journey. She's still trying to figure it out. And that's what we're called to be as church. Can we walk with people who are on the journey? Wow. Thank you. Thanks, Christina. And so, Sister Christina, just so you know, did you ever hear about the group called the Nuns and the Nons? Have you heard this? Community,
yes.
Women's community. I tell you, thank God for women religious. I just want to tell you that. Women religious communities around the United States are opening their doors to young adults, to have dinner with them, to pray with them, to hear their stories. It's not a recruitment. It is just to walk with them. These women are going to where these young adults work so that they can get a sense of their life. The Nuns and the Nons, that's worth Googling just to see the stories of these are all different ways of creating community. People are responding to these hungers in new ways. What is all this going to mean for the way we do parish life? And I have a suspicion when we get through this COVID-19 stuff, I think church is going to look real different. And so I think there's a blessing in the midst of this virus for those with vision who are willing to think through what's this going to look like for us. I believe that. But I think we're going to be a different kind of church. And I think the Spirit is alive and well.
Well, thank you, Bob. And unless there's another question, I think we can end on that beautiful note.
my little soapbox.
No, of hope and encouragement, and at the same time of it's a call to discernment, because we're in the middle of this, and it's the Spirit that is talking to everyone in our church and outside of it. So again, we were very happy to have you with us this evening. We wish you well, stay safe and healthy. The same for everybody else, and stay tuned for our next Digital Theology and Depth. We're getting started on this new format, and let everybody else know. We're going to be placing this recording in our YouTube channel in case you want to share this with people in your parishes and your groups and friends and family. And again, God bless and thank you all. Bob, thank you very much.
And may I come back next year in the flesh?
Of course. And we will celebrate that.
We will.
Having you here in San Antonio.
We will.
Have a good night. God bless.
Thank you. Folks, thank you, and God bless. Good night now.